We read The Three-Body Problem, and this is a review video. Hello. You know those books that you have on your shelf that have been sitting on your shelf for about 3-4 years, and you know you're going to get to them, and then they start to nag at you. They sit and they stare at you. You're sitting on the sofa and you look at it and you're like, I bought you a few years ago, I haven't read you yet. And they're like, read me. I had this moment last week where I randomly said, you know what, I think it's about time that I read The Three-Body Problem by Cixin Liu. And I did that. And then you did exactly the same thing.
I also did that. Yeah.
So this is a review video.
Sort of. We also watched the first season of the TV show kind of at the same time. So we kind of started the TV show as you were reading the book, and then I read the book after having watched the full season of the TV show. So we thought we could kind of talk about...
Thoughts on the book, maybe
Yeah.
thoughts on the TV show as well. No spoilers. And then a little bit of spoiler chat at the end.
I think the first thing of interest here is that the book is obviously translated from Chinese. I had never read anything, never mind science fiction or genre fiction, that was translated from Chinese, as far as I can remember anyway. And I just think translated fiction is interesting in general. And here we have a science fiction book that is set entirely in China, written by a Chinese person with Chinese characters, a Chinese perspective, and set with the backdrop of the Chinese Cultural Revolution, which I knew next to nothing about, to be honest, if not nothing. And that alone, I think, makes it a very interesting reading experience.
It makes it a book worth reading, yeah. I have always been a fan of science fiction. Read more science fiction probably in my teens than I had done in like my early 20s, for sure. Several years ago now, I think I went to the bookshop, I was like, I hadn't read sci-fi in a while. I'm going to just pick out 3 sci-fi that are sitting on the shelves in the bookshop that appeal to me in one way or another. And in general, I'm fairly aware that I like adventure science fiction, but I also really do, when I'm in the mood, like the big idea science fiction. And The Three-Body Problem was the one that I picked at that time, but it was the one that I sort of put off because then we discovered BookTube, and the conversation around it is quite mixed. People say it's a slightly, not a difficult read maybe, but
Dry.
The writing is a little stilted. And I think after reading the book now, finally, after it's sitting on the shelf and staring at me for 4 years, whatever it is, I understand both sides of the conversation about the three-body problem. However, my overall sentiment is that I had a great time reading this book. It's a book worth reading, I think. Yes, I understand if you read it maybe as sort of Western lens in terms of the storytelling, you might find it very blunt at times, very jagged, very matter-of-fact and emotionless. I kind of enjoyed that, actually. It was a sort of a change of pace. I don't know if his writing style is specifically a Chinese thing, a translation thing, or if it's just a Cixin Liu thing. It could just be a Cixin Liu thing. But the thing I found most interesting, apart from just the cool sci-fi concepts, was how the first contact alien story and the sort of discussion of bringing people into a new cultural age is mirrored by the Chinese Cultural Revolution and this one central character who I actually think is a very interesting character. Mm-hmm. And I will push back on some of the criticisms of characterization in this first book, because I think Ye Wenjie is a really cool character in this book. And then obviously we also watched the show. I think the show captures the same, although we'll talk about it a little in spoilers. The show doesn't go full in on Ye Wenjie. Anyway, if you don't know anything about Three-Body Problem, the basic premise is that during the Chinese Cultural Revolution of the late 60s, which is basically when China was, I guess, rebelling against academic thought and scientific thought, and there was a push towards kind of communist oppression, and that kind of dictated discourse in science in China, and a kind of a regression of sorts in that kind of line of thinking. We have a character whose father is an academic, a scientist. She's also a scientist, and her father gets killed at the start of the book by some radicals, by the Red Guards, basically. And it kind of, I guess, sets her on her journey throughout the book, and basically gives you an establishment of where her mind and her mentality and her thought process is at. And then we have a whole plot where aliens might be coming to Earth, an advanced alien civilization. And it is all kind of tied together through a very cyberpunk virtual reality game, where we need to solve the three-body problem, which is essentially a problem in physics where how do you predict the movement of three bodies, suns, that a planet might be orbiting around, or vice versa? Is it constant? Is it chaotic? How do you mathematically solve this problem to make a planet like that livable or whatever? Anyway, some of the physics concepts went over my head, but it was all very accessibly written. I actually found the writing style, you can criticize it, but I found it just made it so easy to read that because I was in the mood for big ideas and a bit of cool stuff and something drastically different to what we generally read in the Western world, I had a great time. I read it in 2 sittings, pretty much. So those are my overall thoughts of the book. What about you?
Yeah, I think very similar. Generally, I had no idea if this book would do it for me or not, because I haven't read a lot of science fiction. I'm still figuring out if I like hard sci-fi. But the TV show really did it for me. And then you were reading the book and I was curious, and I figured, look, let's just jump right in. Let's just do it. And I think in part, having watched the first season of the TV show, or like everything that's out of the TV show, helped to get into it, because I knew what to pay attention to. I had a grasp of what was going on. And then towards the latter half of the book, maybe it hindered it a little bit, because I think the TV show made some aspects of it a little bit more compelling. We can talk about that in the spoiler section. The criticisms towards the writing style and the characterization, I understand. They make sense. I think in terms of the writing style, at times I found it refreshingly blunt. Like, don't get me wrong. Yeah. I enjoy my long epic fantasy of 1,000 pages where we describe the trees and what the characters are eating. But sometimes you don't want that. And I found it, refreshingly to the point. Like, all the dialogue is about the plot and the science concepts that are being discussed. And sometimes it was a little bit funny. And, it doesn't make for the characters that you're going to be the most invested in. But if you know that going in, it makes it extremely compelling to read, because you never lose the plot kind of momentum.
Yeah, I also think it's like, I generally am of the opinion that bad writing is when writers just explain the plot through character dialogue, with characters explaining things they should already know to each other, and it all sounds cringy and wooden and forced. And those are all things that I could apply to this book. But
it's not that bad, though.
But it's not that bad. It's not... The dialogue's never cringy, either. There is always a reason for the characters to be having the conversations that they're having, because they are all so focused on what is going on in the book.
Yeah.
And what is going on in the book is so fascinating and compelling, and I wouldn't necessarily go as far to say unique. I see a lot of influence here from Childhood's End by Arthur C. Clarke, and specifically then like Asimov in its delivery. Cixin Liu clearly loves all the things that I also love, like what's out there? Why is space so quiet? Is it a good thing that space is so quiet? Should we really be contacting species that could potentially be out there that are more advanced than we are, that have more dimensions than we do? All of those kind of questions that I find pretty cool, and it's why I got into sci-fi as a kid, and I read a bunch of sci-fi before. So it had been a while since I'd read a kind of typically hard sci-fi. This one I found refreshingly easy to get through. The ideas were cool. It had been a while. I was in the mood. So yeah, it sort of worked. And
I read the first 200 pages in one day, in a sitting.
Yeah.
I was not expecting that at all.
And I wouldn't necessarily then categorize the writing as bad in that sense. It's just
it's functional.
It's functional, yeah.
And so are the characters. But I understand the criticism of bad characterization, or just not necessarily bad characterization. It's more so that people say that the characters are not really fully formed.
Yeah.
I understand that. I would push back a little bit. I didn't find that there was no characterization. I just don't think it's the focus, because we're not focusing on the inner lives and turmoils of these people. So, for example, Jay Wenjie, you mentioned, is a compelling character in terms of what she does and what her motives are, but we get a lot of that just in the narration. Like, we're told, and then we see what she does, but we don't get her thoughts at all. Even, I'd say, Wang is probably the main POV in that sense that we get, but it doesn't feel like a POV. The narrator is quite detached from the characters.
Yeah.
So we're not really in his mind, and I don't know how Wang is feeling, and I think that's what causes that sense of detachment maybe for people reading it.
And I think you need to, maybe, if you're interested in trying it, you need to be aware of, I guess, what you're interested in and what you want from the book. And it's a case of, if you are the kind of person that enjoys the odd bit of sci-fi, but you like adventure science fiction with great characters and a cool story and an adventure to kind of get behind, this ain't going to be the book for you. But if you want to open your mind to a cool idea, to questions about the universe and existence, and just have characters talk about that, then yeah. Or if you want to read a completely different voice in a similar genre, and just learn things. Because I generally like to read the kind of harder end of sci-fi to learn things and to sort of expand my perspective a little bit. It's kind of why I like to read it.
Yeah, challenge you a little bit.
Yeah, and I think this is just it's a good book to read. I'm very glad that I read it. It's one of those books that I say I'm very glad that I read this book. And I also had a great time with it. I also think it's very compelling.
I was just going to say, I think a lot of people talking about this book online focus on the stuff that we're talking about, because it is noticeable. So there is a lot of science in it. There's parts that I was like, oh, that's super interesting, and then there was parts where I was almost speed reading, just to be okay, I don't really understand what, but also I'd watched the TV show, so I kind of knew what the conclusion was going to be, so that was okay to do.
The human computer bit in the game,
that bit, flags. For example, I was like, okay, cool.
They're making a human
binary code computer, gotcha. And people focus on how it's written and the characters, because they might be downsides for somebody to pick them up, so it makes sense to talk about these things. What I don't see talked about as much is that it's a really fun book. I had just a good time, outside of the fact that it is hard science fiction, that is concept driven, and that it's written in a very functional kind of style. It is a fun book to read. It's very easy to read. I actually find it extremely accessible.
Very accessible.
And I think that helps, because the science concepts are not necessarily super accessible, but the way the book is written kind of balances that out. It's very unpretentious, actually, in how it's written, which I sometimes don't find with Asimov. Which to me makes it feel drier and less accessible. I've only tried Foundation for reference. I kept saying,
I don't think Asimov is always like that. This is a tangent.
No.
His robot stories are quite cool.
I have heard that he has some thrillery type books as well. But anyway, comparing it to Foundation specifically. But I was surprised at just how quickly I was reading it, and just how good of a time I was having. It's not slow moving, although I think that the TV show packs more into the start of the story than this does. So if you've watched the show the way I had going into then the book, it felt very distilled, even though objectively there's still a lot going on, if that
So
makes sense.
do you want to do a little section now of comparing the book to the TV show? Because we then finished the TV show as well. In terms of storytelling, I do actually think that for my personal taste, the show improves upon the story of the book in terms of the delivery and the structure and the investment in the characters. So in the book, it's not huge spoilers. We'll talk spoilers in a little bit. In the book, there's sort of two main characters. There's Ye Wen-jae, who is the woman at the start during the Cultural Revolution, and she is throughout all the decades. Then there's kind of two timelines. And then in the present timeline, we also have Wang, who is a scientist, basically, who kind of teams up with a cop to figure out why scientists are suddenly all like committing suicide, or there are strange things happening with academics. And it kind of leads a sort of a mini investigation, and Wang is the one that starts playing this mysterious VR video game that may be connected to all of this. That, in a sense, kind of reads a little bit like a thriller, but Cixin Liu doesn't necessarily structure that in a thriller kind of way.
Nope.
Where he's just sort of bluntly telling you things. And I quite enjoyed it in the book, to be honest. It's different. You could call it poorly done. But then I do think that in terms of enjoyment and taste and getting a fun story out of it, I do think the show then, after, improved upon that. And it sort of split Wang into two different characters, two women on the show. And I found those two characters a little more interesting than Wang in the book. Ye Wen-jae, I think, is pretty standard. I just think that the show creating a couple more characters, maybe bringing in a plot line as well from book 2. I started book 2. They bring a sort of plot line a little forward and use a character already established as part of a friend group in the show.
Just kind of plant the seeds season 2, book 2 storyline.
I thought they did
straight away.
I thought they did a good job with that, and it creates that sort of emotional investment that maybe that's just something that in Western literature we're more eager for. So I think in that way the show did kind of improve on the storytelling.
I think my one criticism of the show in terms of changes, because, and this is a little bit speculation because we haven't read books 2 and 3, but just from reading the back of book 2, basically, there are some storylines that get brought forward, like you said, but in order to do that and plant the seeds straight away, there are some convenient technological advances that just happen like that in the show.
Yeah.
Whereas reading book 1, I can see seeds being planted and then that's gonna start later. So
he's a little more methodical about the science in the book as
exactly.
well, and sort of extrapolating the idea.
Yeah.
Which again is why you would want to read that book. So if you're not interested in that sort of extrapolation of the idea, then it may not be your thing. But if you're interested in the entertainment of it, the show actually does a good job.
It sacrifices like some not logic necessarily, but realistic science advancements and like that kind of convenience for the sake of compelling, slightly more character-driven feeling storytelling.
For dramatization, yeah.
Yeah, and I think it works. Like, I don't think it's a huge criticism. There were a couple of times in the show where we were like, well, that's convenient, isn't it?
Yeah.
But it does make for a compelling season of television. I don't think it would have worked as a simple, straight adaptation. It would have felt dry. Whereas in the book, because it's a book, you have the luxury of going into it with a different set of expectations.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're listening to dialogue, it always feels a little bit different.
Yeah.
So I think there were positive changes, but it just creates some slight, not fully plot holes, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. And I think I generally hate the question of which was better, the book or the movie. I don't really like that question. They're just different. and you'll get different things out of each one because they're different mediums. Anyway.
This is a different topic of conversation, but because I think that sometimes you can say if the show or the
Oh, if it's a particularly
is better.
bad adaptation.
Yeah,
Or, yeah.
like
yeah.
sometimes you can say, oh, the book or the dramatization in terms of show or movie, whatever it is, does a better job. One or the other does a better job at telling this story. I think in this case, however, they are telling the same story, but there's enough significant differences that you can't really compare them, because it seems like the ultimate goal, the through line goal, is different.
Yeah.
For the two.
I'm also not sure how I feel about the westernization of the show, with most of the main characters being English or American or whatever.
Well, to be fair, at first I was like, oh, they're all English. They're not.
They're
a
not
lot
all-
of them
yeah.
are not. It's just set
In England.
in
yeah.
England.
Actually, yeah, that's true.
But most of them are actually
from all over.
all over. They just speak English. Like, they have a Mexican character.
Yeah.
They have an
New Zealand.
American, New Zealand. They're just English speak. Like, they're still Western.
Yeah.
So it's westernizing it, but not Americanizing it or like making it British, which I appreciate actually.
That definitely better than doing that.
Yeah. But I agree, it would have been interesting to have
The sort of
like, set it in
Chinese
China.
angle. Yeah.
Yeah.
I get the idea of then wanting it to be sort of global as well, though. So that's fair. Like, it's not a major criticism. I found myself very interested in the Chinese perspective on this, you know, especially with the whole kind of underlying motif or theme or whatever you want to say of sort of rejecting scientific advancement in the Cultural Revolution, and pairing that with, well, there's aliens coming now, so what are you going to do about that? It was just very interesting.
Yeah.
And I think the show kind of sacrifices examining that a little bit.
It does, because it uses that Cultural Revolution like starting point, but you lose
for one character.
Yeah.
Not for the whole kind of. Whereas that theme is kind of the whole thing of the book, really.
Yeah.
So that would be my one kind of criticism, I guess, of the show, and the one thing I think the book does a little better, or well, not better. It's set out to write a different kind of thing.
It's just it's not better because like the intention is different, but it's maybe more interesting in that way. So I think the show is more interesting in terms of examining character. The book is more interesting in terms of the cultural backdrop that it's giving you and the themes that come with it and kind of the metaphor that comes with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So before we get into a couple of spoilers, to wrap up a little for people who haven't read it or maybe are interested in reading it, I think it's a really interesting book to read, if not just because of the discussion that surrounds it. You might pick it up and think the writing in this is so dry and sort of bland, and maybe a bit bad. But maybe just open your mind to a different way of telling a story, getting ideas across. If you want to learn a little bit, or if you want to explore the possibilities of what might happen with all of this, then give it a go. It's also very, very quick and easy to read, and I think he does make it all accessible. If you don't understand some of the physics concepts, I think he dumbs them down to the point where I was like, yeah, okay.
I found that even when you get sometimes a couple of pages of like the long explanation, he then at the end wraps it up in terms of like, this is what that means. And you're like, okay, cool, thank you.
Also, I gotta commend Ken Liu on the translation. There are little footnotes in it that are so interesting and helpful as you go along. He stops and he kind of puts a footnote and explains a little concept or a little detail that just adds a bit more to the experience of reading the book, and you feel enriched.
Yeah.
So I think it's just a book worth reading.
Yeah.
And then in terms of TV shows are a fun time.
I really liked it. I don't think it's my favorite season of TV that I've watched this year, because we watched Blackbird, written by Dennis Lehane, which was incredible. And I think in terms of science fiction, my favorite current TV show is For All Mankind. But I did like it a lot. And it got me invested in a very seemingly effortless way. But we can get into that now if we want to go into spoilers.
Yeah.
You have been warned. Spoilers going forward.
Leave now and never come back.
But do come back, actually.
Leave now and never come back.
Come back for the next video.
Gone, gone, gone. Smeagol is free.
I want to talk about Ye Wen-jae and the fact that in the book, like, I think she's similarly interesting in the two, but she is...
In the two?
In the two, in the book and the TV show.
In the two, sorry.
The two.
Sorry.
But I think, like, in the book, like, they have made her a little bit more likable in the show.
They have, yes.
She full on, like, murders her husband.
She yeets her husband off a cliff in the book. I was like, what? And then we're getting to the show, and I'm like, I don't know, how are they going to do the end? And then I was saying to you, without spoiling it, going, oh, this is the last scene of the book. Oh, this is different from the book. This is very open-ended. Anyway, yeah, she yeets her husband off a cliff in the book. And in the show, it's just sort of, that's kind of dropped. There's the whole sort of subplot with the crazy cult lady.
Don't they kind of imply in the show that the father of her child is Evans? Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I guess we have her, like, kind of not very dramatic reaction at all to Evans dying. So you kind of still get an element of, like, yeah, but, like...
I'm actually still unsure. I don't know if I misread something in the book, but I'm actually still unsure if the husband is actually the father. I think he is.
Well, she's pregnant.
Yeah, but doesn't she still meet Evans, or does she only meet Evans?
She's already pregnant when she meets Evans, I think.
Okay, then I was misremembering.
If I got that correctly.
The show is getting mixed in with the story now. Anyway.
I don't know. It could be a case that things get revealed in later books and we don't know yet.
Ye Wen-jae, I found a little more interesting in the book, even. Just because she made up her mind and she is kind of radicalized by the idea of the aliens.
Mm-hmm.
And then in turn radicalizes everyone who buys into the idea with her. And they do touch on that in the show as well.
I like the environmentalist background to her radicalization in the book, which is kind of there in the show because they talk about the deforestation and, like, all that. But it's more... I feel like it comes across more strongly in the book that there's two kind of things that kickstart her on this path. The first thing is seeing her father killed in the Cultural Revolution and, like, losing faith in, I guess, people, right, in society and, like, what people are capable of and what young people are capable of, and also in the government, whatever. And then the other side, it's that book that she gets from the guy in the construction company and the journalist when she's working and, like, about the environment and, like, how bad humans are for the world, basically.
Spring something?
Yeah.
Something spring.
And then those two things kind of set her on the path of then going and saying to the aliens, yeah, please come over here and, like, conquer us because we can't handle it ourselves. Which, to be fair... Can you fully blame her?
I have these thoughts about twice a day.
But I think the show said, okay, up to this point, you're going to have people going like, can you blame her? But the moment she's like, oh, I was going to kill this guy because he might expose me. Oh, my husband's there too. Oh, well, that's when you lose people.
Yeah.
So I understand the show wanting to keep that a little bit more ambiguous and maybe having you be more torn on whether you should be rooting for her or not.
Mm-hmm.
Although I kind of enjoy the ruthlessness of her in the book.
Oh, I enjoy the balls to have your main character just be a total sociopath.
Yeah. Kind of.
Yeah. Just a straight up villainous character that if you think about the sort of the media around first contact science fiction stories, most of them in the English-speaking world come from America, are all very heroic. Very, we're going to get a really smart person to do the heroic thing and communicate with the aliens. Even Arrival, something like Arrival, which curiously is based on a short story by Ted Chiang. Like Independence Day and all these sort of, it's more popcorny type of stuff, but the balls to have your character be the person that maybe brings about the end of the earth. Intentionally, yeah. And just one lone character making that decision because she had a bad day. Well, a bad few years.
She had a bad life.
Yeah. I just find that very, very cool. And I kind of got invested in that in the book. And then in the show, does maybe try to increase the sympathy there. But I think what the show did better, for my taste, was the friend group.
Absolutely, yeah.
And then splitting Wang into two characters, creating a cool dynamic between those two characters. It allowed a bit of room for those interesting plots to breathe as well, because both characters do a lot of shit that is all on Wang, really, in the book. And you don't really get enough time to necessarily consider the nanofiber stuff. They just mention it he mentions it in passing in the book, and
like the moral implications of it all.
The moral implications, yeah. But then also, Will, spoiler alert, the guy that has cancer.
This whole thing is a spoiler alert. So I think that he is the heart of the show, and it's such a simple storytelling technique, right? It's a guy who has cancer, so it's a guy who is slowly dying, and he is in love with someone who doesn't know. So you're instantly rooting, well, I want you to tell her. And everybody wants him to tell her, and he's like, no, what's the point? I'm going to die, and she has a boyfriend. Like, why would I do this to her?
It teeters on the edge of melodrama a little bit.
It does, but I think because for most of it, it's quite subdued.
Yeah, that's true.
It works.
Yeah.
And I think the actor really sells it. I actually think the actor is amazing.
He's really good, yeah.
Because he's very subtle about it and very like deadpan a lot of the time, but you really connect to it.
So that whole subplot with they take out his brain and they send it out to space, that's obviously not in the first book anyway. I assume maybe that could be a subplot they've taken forward from like even the third book. From what I've read so far of book 2, they're doing the wall facer program. They brought that forward into season 1 of the show. And I really like how they did that as well, because one of the friends in the friend group, one of the scientists, is the wall facer character from book 2. So that, again, whenever they do season 2 and 3, that's just, you're already going to be invested. Whereas now with book 2, I don't mind. I'm going to go ahead and read it, and I'm going to see. I want to find out what happens. But it's a completely new character.
Yeah.
So again, the need for emotional investment or whatever, or the sort of series with the characters is a Western mentality maybe as well.
Maybe, yeah, like just something that we're more used to. But I think with that being the objective of the show, of like, you kind of want some emotional investment to get people to come back for season 2. I think that really works. I think making them a friend group with like pre-established relationships between them works.
Yeah.
For them to carry that thread
and
forward.
There's believable dynamics between them all. They're all at sort of different stages in careers, or they've all sort of made peace as well with how their lives have turned out. You kind of get invested in that aspect of it, paired with all the science and the cool alien stuff that's going on. Whereas I think for the book, I just really enjoyed reading something that was about that stuff.
Yeah.
I didn't really care that I wasn't getting invested in characters and the psychology of these people and their relationship. I didn't care. I was reading it for the stuff, for the cool aliens, like aliens.
I do want to acknowledge in the show as well, Leanne Cunningham's character. Wade?
Oh, I want to acknowledge Liam Cunningham's character. How often is it you see a dub with his accent being the boss of whatever he is, the CIA or whatever?
I just imagine Dan and Dave approaching in and being like, so, we want you to work with us again, but this time we just want you to be yourself.
Yeah, just do your accent like you're down the road in the pub, talking to the lads. We're seeing some aliens later, boys. It's refreshing, honestly.
It's great. And he's the big boss of something, we don't know.
Hilarious. You don't even hear that accent in Irish national television because they train it out of them. Because you can't have a rough inner city Dublin accent in the media. It was wonderful. I liked it. Very personal bias going in towards Liam Cunningham there, but I like that element of the show.
Yeah. And he's just such a fun character.
Yeah, he's no nonsense. It's like he's proper Irish.
He's playing himself.
Yeah.
He's 100% playing himself.
Yeah.
It's so funny.
I know 50 people like that.
We met him in a pub once.
We
and
did.
he was exactly like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you want a photo, do you? All right. Anyway, we just had a great time with a little bit of hard sci-fi, Chinese hard sci-fi. One of the biggest selling science fiction books of the last 25 years.
Mm-hmm.
An important book, I think. An important book for the genre. A genre I care a lot about.
Very interesting book.
How about you? Any final thoughts?
Basically that. I haven't read that much science fiction. I haven't read that much hard sci-fi. So it was a fun experiment to read a completely different perspective, to read a Chinese translated book. And I'm really glad I did, and I had a great time. And I'm excited to continue the series, to be honest.
Yep, I think I'm going to read all 3 now in the near future. And I'll be also looking forward to the next season of the show.
What I would love to know is if you have read the books and watched the show, what did you think of the show having read all of the books? Because I think we were biased towards the show because we were kind of doing that first or at the same time. So we weren't coming at the show with any set of expectations already. So I'd love to know, with so many changes, how you felt about it, if you see it as something different, if you have gripes with it, we'd love to know. Or in general, if you've just read the books, why you like them, why you don't like them.
Yeah. And if you enjoyed our little chat about 3-body problem, give the video a like, comment as well, tell us all that stuff. And subscribe if you haven't subscribed already.
We greatly appreciate it. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.
What she said.